The heavy oak door of the penthouse office muffled the sounds from within, but not completely. A sharp crack followed by a woman's stifled cry made Jamal Mitchell stop his cleaning cart dead in the hallway. He stood perfectly still, every muscle coiled, his deep brown eyes fixed on the door. He was just a janitor, a ghost paid to clean up after the powerful, but the man he used to be was screaming at him. Before he could decide what to do, the door was pulled open just enough for a small body to slip through. A little girl, no older than 7, stumbled into the hall, her chest heaving with silent sobs. She saw him standing there, a shadow with a push broom, and ran. She didn't scream. Her terror was too deep for that. She grabbed the fabric of his work pants with 2 small, trembling hands, looked up at him with wide, desperate eyes, and delivered the words that ended his quiet life forever. "They beat my mom. She's dying." The words hit Jamal with the force of a shockwave, shattering the quiet discipline of his new life. In that instant, 5 years of practiced invisibility evaporated. The janitor was gone. The ranger was back. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the child's fear. He didn't wait for an answer. He guided her behind the bulk of his industrial cleaning cart and pushed the penthouse door inward. The scene inside was a collision of luxury and brutality. Sprawled across a vast office that overlooked the glittering city skyline, 4 large men in dark suits were cornering a woman, Olivia Ellison. Jamal recognized her from the corporate photos in the lobby. She was on her feet, but barely. A nasty cut bled freely above her eye, and her lip was split. She fought with the ferocity of a cornered lioness, her movements sharp and defiant, but she was exhausted, and her attackers were closing in, professional and unhurried. One of them held a length of thin black cord. Jamal moved without a sound. The first man, the one closest to the door, never saw him coming. Jamal's hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it in a way nature never intended. A sharp snap echoed in the room as the man's arm broke. Jamal used the man's own momentum to spin him around, a human shield between him and the others, and then drove him face first into the wall. He crumpled to the thick, expensive carpet without a sound. The other 3 turned, their eyes wide with shock. A janitor. Their momentary confusion was all the opening Jamal needed. He surged forward, a blur of motion. The second man swung a clumsy, powerful punch. Jamal sidestepped it effortlessly, his hand chopping down on the man's collarbone. The bone gave way with a sickening crack, and the man went down, howling in pain. The third attacker was more cautious. He pulled a small weighted sap from his jacket, but he was too slow. Jamal closed the distance, his foot sweeping the man's legs out from under him. As he fell, Jamal delivered a precise, calculated strike to the side of his neck. The man's eyes rolled back, and he was out before he hit the ground. The last man, clearly the leader, backed away, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. He reached inside his jacket, but Jamal was already on him. He grabbed the man's arm, preventing the draw, and slammed his palm up under the man's nose. The cartilage crunched. The man staggered back, his eyes watering, disoriented. Jamal followed, hooking his leg behind the man's and driving him backward over a low-slung leather sofa. The man's head hit the marble floor with a dull, final thud. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by the ragged sound of Olivia Ellison's breathing. She stared at Jamal, her one good eye wide with astonishment before her knees finally buckled. Jamal caught her before she hit the floor, his combat training shifting seamlessly from offense to triage. He swept her into his arms and carried her to the sofa, laying her down gently. The combat medic took over now, his hands moving with practiced calm. "My daughter," Olivia rasped, her voice. "She's safe." "She's with me," Jamal said, his tone reassuring but firm. His fingers went to Olivia's neck, checking her pulse. It was thready, too fast. He tilted her head back gently, ensuring her airway was clear. Her pupils were unequal, a clear sign of a concussion. He ran his large, dark hands over her skull, feeling for fractures, his touch both professional and surprisingly gentle. He saw the deep bruising on her ribs where they had struck her. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, keeping his voice level. "Olivia Ellison," she managed, her breath catching. "Good, Olivia. You have a serious concussion. I need to get you out of here." He saw the discarded cord on the floor. He saw the heavy, methodical nature of the bruises. This wasn't a robbery. It was a professional targeted assault. Calling building security or even 911 was a gamble he couldn't take. The people who sent these men would have eyes and ears everywhere. They would be expecting an official response. They wouldn't be expecting a janitor to walk her out the back door. He stood and walked back to the office entrance. Harper was peeking around the edge of the cleaning cart, her small face streaked with tears. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "It's okay now," he said softly. "Those men can't hurt your mom anymore, but we have to be very quiet. We're going to play a game, the quiet game." "Can you do that for me?" Harper nodded, her eyes fixed on him, a fragile trust forming in their depths. "Good girl," he returned to Olivia, who was struggling to stay conscious. "I'm getting you out of here," he said. "It's the only way." "Where?" she whispered, her consciousness fading. "Someplace safe." He slid his arms beneath her, one under her knees, the other supporting her back. She was lighter than he expected. As he lifted her, she gave a soft moan of pain but didn't protest. He looked around the opulent office one last time at the 4 unconscious men scattered amongst the symbols of immense wealth and power. 5 years he had worked so hard to leave this world of violence behind, to build a quiet life for his own daughter. And in 5 minutes it was all undone. He walked to the door. Olivia held securely in his arms. Harper followed close behind, her small hand clutching the back of his gray work pants. His knowledge of this building wasn't of boardrooms and stock prices, but of service elevators, forgotten stairwells, and the labyrinthine corridors of the sub-basement. His past had taught him how to fight and how to heal. His present was about to give them a way to escape. He would take them to the only place he knew was secure. He would take them home. The service elevator whined in the echoing silence of the concrete shaft, its slow descent a stark contrast to the frantic beating of Jamal's heart. He held Olivia securely, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. Beside him, Harper clutched a fistful of his gray work pants, her small knuckles white, her eyes wide and dark, darted around the bare metal walls of the elevator, taking in the strange hidden world beneath the one she knew. "It's okay," Jamal murmured, his voice barely disturbing the quiet. "This is my secret passageway. Not many people know about it." Harper looked up at him, a flicker of awe replacing some of the fear. She nodded, accepting his words with the simple faith of a child. The elevator shuddered to a halt in the sub-basement. The air here was cool and smelled of damp concrete and motor oil. Jamal shifted Olivia's weight, listening intently. He could hear the distant hum of the building's main generators and the faint, rhythmic clank of a pipe somewhere deep in the labyrinth. No voices, no footsteps. They were alone. He moved with a quiet, purposeful stride through the maze of corridors, following a path he had walked 1,000 times with a mop and bucket. His janitor's keycard granted him access through a series of locked maintenance doors, each one taking them further from the opulent lobby and closer to the freedom of the loading docks. They paused once, flattening themselves into a dark alcove as the crackle of a security guard's radio echoed from an intersecting hallway. Jamal held his breath, shielding the 2 girls with his body until the footsteps faded away. He felt Harper tremble against his leg, and he placed a calming hand on her head. Finally, a heavy steel door led them out into the chilled night air of a deserted alley. The sudden wash of streetlights felt like a spotlight. Jamal's old pickup truck, a dented but reliable Ford, was parked in its designated employee spot at the far end of the lot. It was an ugly, unassuming vehicle, the perfect camouflage. He gently placed Olivia in the passenger seat, buckling her in carefully before lifting a wide-eyed Harper onto the bench beside her. The drive from the glittering towers of the financial district to his working-class neighborhood was a journey across worlds. The gleaming facades of corporate power gave way to brick-faced apartment buildings and the warm, scattered lights of corner stores. Jamal, a black man in a gray uniform, felt the unspoken shift in judgment as he drove from that world to his. Olivia remained unconscious, oblivious to the transition from her world to his. Jamal's apartment was on the third floor of a modest walk-up. The hallway was narrow and smelled faintly of his neighbor's cooking. He balanced Olivia in one arm while fumbling for his keys, Harper and the weight of the world on his shoulders. He pushed the door open to a scene of comforting domesticity. The living room was small but tidy, dominated by a large, overflowing bookshelf and a comfortable-looking armchair. The television was playing a cartoon at low volume. His 9-year-old daughter, Amara, was sitting on the floor showing a picture book to Martha Jenkins, their elderly, kind-hearted babysitter. They both looked up as he entered. Mrs. Jenkins' warm smile faltered, replaced by a gasp of shock. Amara's eyes grew wide as she saw the unconscious woman in her father's arms and the terrified little girl hiding behind him. "Jamal! My heavens! What happened?" Mrs. Jenkins exclaimed, rising to her feet. "There was an accident at work," Jamal said, his voice calm and even, betraying none of the adrenaline still coursing through him. He carried Olivia past them, down the short hallway to his own bedroom. "She fell. She needs help." He laid Olivia down on his bed, the simple quilt a stark contrast to the expensive silk of her blouse. Amara crept to the doorway of the living room, her expression a mixture of fear and concern. "Daddy, is she okay?" Jamal came back and knelt in front of his daughter, placing his hands on her shoulders. "She's hurt, sweetie, but she's going to be okay. I need you to be a big girl for me right now. Can you do that?" Amara nodded solemnly. "This is Harper," he said, gently guiding the other girl forward. "She's very scared. I need you to help me look after her." Amara's gaze softened as she looked at the younger girl. She gave Harper a small, shy smile and held out her hand. "Hi, Harper. I'm Amara. Do you want to see my drawings?" Harper hesitated for a moment, then let go of Jamal's pants and took Amara's hand. Jamal turned to Mrs. Jenkins, pulling his wallet from his back pocket. "Thank you for staying late, Martha. I'm sorry to rush you out." He pressed twice her usual payment into her hand. "But Jamal, should we call an ambulance?" she whispered, her eyes full of concern. "No," he said firmly. "I've already checked her over. I have some training. A hospital is the last thing she needs right now. Please, Martha, I can handle this. I just need you to go home and not mention this to anyone. It's very important." Mrs. Jenkins looked from Jamal's steady, serious face to the two little girls, now sitting side by side on the rug. She had known him since Amara was a toddler. She trusted him. She gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All right, dear, if you're sure, call me if you need anything at all." After she left, Jamal locked the door, sliding the deadbolt and chain into place. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment. He retrieved a large, professional-grade medical kit from the back of his closet, a ghost from his old life, and returned to the bedroom. He worked under the soft glow of a bedside lamp, cleaning and dressing the cut on Olivia's forehead. He checked her ribs, relieved to find them bruised, not broken. The concussion was his main concern. He carefully monitored her breathing and pulse, his focus absolute. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice Olivia's eyelids flutter open. Her vision was blurry, swimming in and out of focus. She saw the unfamiliar pattern of a ceiling, the soft yellow light. A man was leaning over her, his natural dark coils brushing against her cheek as he taped a bandage to her head. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She tried to push herself up, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Jamal's hands came up, open and pacifying. "Easy, you're safe. Just lie still." Her unfocused eyes tried to place him. The cheap plaid shirt, the worn lines on his face, the quiet authority in his voice. This wasn't a doctor. This wasn't a hospital. The last thing she remembered was pain in the face of one of the men snarling at her. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "Who are you?" Jamal's calm voice cut through the fog of Olivia's panic. "Easy, you're safe. Just lie still." Her eyes, struggling to focus, took in the details of the room. It was simple, sparse. A worn wooden dresser stood against one wall. A framed photo of a smiling black woman and a little girl on top. The curtains were a plain, faded blue. This wasn't a hospital. It wasn't her home. The terror returned, sharp and suffocating. "Who are you?" she repeated, her voice a raw whisper. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness sent the room spinning, and a sharp pain lanced through her ribs. "My name is Jamal Mitchell," he said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder to keep her from rising. "I work at your building in maintenance. Your daughter, she came and got me." The words seemed to hang in the air, nonsensical. Her daughter, Harper. The memory crashed back into her. The office, the men, their cold eyes, the brutal, shocking pain. Harper's scream. "Harper!" she gasped, her heart seizing. "Where is my daughter? Is she all right?" "She's right here. She's safe," Jamal assured her. He turned his head. "Amara, can you bring Harper in here for a minute?" A moment later, two small figures appeared in the doorway. Amara, a girl with her father's serious eyes, stood slightly in front, holding Harper's hand. Harper herself looked small and lost in the unfamiliar hallway, but she was unharmed. Her eyes lit up when she saw her mother was awake. "Mommy!" She rushed to the bedside. "Oh, baby!" Olivia breathed, tears of relief blurring her already hazy vision. She reached out, her hand trembling, and brushed Harper's hair back from her forehead. Seeing her child, whole and unharmed, was the only thing that mattered. It was an anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. It was the first thing that made her believe that she might actually be safe. She looked from her daughter's face to the man standing calmly by the bed. Jamal Mitchell, the janitor. She had seen him before, a fleeting presence in the hallways late at night when she was working. A man in a gray uniform, someone she had never given a second thought. Now the memory of him moving through her office, a silent, brutally efficient force of nature, clashed with the image of the quiet father in this humble apartment. You saved us," she said, the realization dawning. "I did what anyone would have," he deflected, his gaze steady. "No," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its usual strength. "No, they don't." She looked down at her bandaged hands, at the dull ache spreading through her body. "Why didn't you call the police? An ambulance?" "Because the men who attacked you weren't common criminals," Jamal said simply, his voice low so the children wouldn't overhear. "They were professionals. People like that don't work for someone who can't control the aftermath. Calling 911 would have been like sending up a flare. They'd have known exactly where you were. This way, you just vanished." The cold, calculated logic of his words settled over her. He was right. Whoever had sent them would be monitoring official channels. They would be expecting a frantic call, a police report, a hospital admission. They would not be expecting her to disappear into the night with the janitor. The thought was both terrifying and brilliant. For the first time since waking up, Olivia truly looked at her surroundings. She saw the worn but clean furniture, the neatly stacked books, the faint smell of bleach and cinnamon that seemed to cling to the air. She saw the way his daughter Amara sat with Harper on the floor, showing her a doll with a quiet, gentle patience. This was a home, a sanctuary. "I need to make a call," she said, the CEO in her reasserting itself. "My head of security, my lawyer." Your phone was smashed in the attack," Jamal interrupted gently. "And even if it wasn't, using it would be the first thing they'd track. You have to assume they can access your call logs, your location, everything. For now, you're a ghost. It's the only thing keeping you and your daughter safe." The feeling of utter helplessness was foreign to her, and she hated it. Her entire life was built on control, on having the resources and the power to solve any problem. Now she had nothing. She was injured, trapped in a stranger's apartment, her life and her child's life dependent on the very man she would have overlooked yesterday. He seemed to read the conflict on her face. He left the room and returned a moment later with a glass of water and 2 pills. "For the pain," he said, placing them on the bedside table, "you have a severe concussion, Olivia, and badly bruised ribs. You need to rest." The sound of her first name from his lips felt strangely intimate. Yet his tone was nothing but professional. He was a medic tending to a patient. She watched his hands as he adjusted the pillow behind her back. They were dark, strong, calloused, but his movements were deft and sure. There was a confidence in him, a stillness she had only ever seen in the most disciplined and powerful men. But his power wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet, unshakable core. She lay back, the exhaustion washing over her in waves. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the events, the argument on the phone, the sudden violent entry of the men. their cold, determined faces. They weren't there to rob her. They were there for her. And there was only one person in the world with the resources and the utter ruthlessness to order an attack like that. One person who had been trying to control her for months, whose proposals had become more like threats with each refusal. Lysander Blackwood, she whispered, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. Jamal, who had been quietly watching her from the doorway, gave a single slow nod. The name clearly meant nothing to him, but the look on her face told him everything he needed to know. She had just identified the monster in the dark. "He won't stop," Olivia said, a new wave of fear washing over her. "He's not just going to let me disappear. He will hunt me down." "Let him hunt," Jamal said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm. "He's looking for a CEO. He won't think to look for her in a janitor's apartment." Olivia awoke to the unfamiliar smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was in a hotel, a comforting delusion that shattered as soon as she tried to move. A chorus of aches answered, reminding her of everything. She wasn't in a hotel. She was in a janitor's apartment, a fugitive in her own city. She pushed herself up slowly, her head pounding a dull, rhythmic beat. The simple plaid shirt she'd seen on Jamal last night was draped over a chair, and a clean, folded t-shirt and a pair of gray sweatpants were left at the foot of the bed. They were worn but soft, a quiet offering of comfort. After changing, she followed the sounds of quiet activity into the living room. The scene that greeted her was one of surreal domesticity. Jamal stood at the small stove in the adjoining kitchen, flipping pancakes with an easy, practiced motion. At the small dining table, Amara was patiently showing Harper how to draw a horse, her brow furrowed in concentration. Harper, for her part, was completely absorbed, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time since the ordeal began. The morning sunlight streamed through the single large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a warm glow over the entire scene. "Good morning," Jamal said, not turning around. He had heard her approach. Of course he had. The man seemed to notice everything. "There's coffee and breakfast will be ready in a minute," she murmured her thanks. Feeling like an intruder, she poured herself a mug of coffee. The warmth, a welcome comfort in her hands, she watched him move around the small kitchen, his efficiency just as palpable here as it had been in her office. He was a man comfortable in his own skin, in his own space. He brought a plate of pancakes to the table for her. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck," she answered honestly, "but better." "Thank you." Her eyes drifted to the girls. She seems okay." "Kids are resilient," Jamal said, sitting down across from her. "And Amara is a good big sister." A comfortable silence settled between them as they ate. It was Olivia who finally broke it, the question burning in her mind. "You said you had some training. That wasn't some training, Jamal. What you did last night. Who are you?" Jamal took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze distant for a moment. "A long time ago I was an Army Ranger," he said, his voice flat. "Matter of fact, a combat medic. I spent 10 years in places most people only see on the news." The confession landed with a quiet thud, yet it explained everything. The calm under fire, the tactical precision, the medical knowledge. "What happened? Why are you?" She trailed off, not wanting to sound insulting. "My wife Layla, she got sick," he said, his eyes flicking to the photo on the dresser. "Cancer. I came home, spent every last minute I could with her. After she passed, the old job didn't make sense anymore. Amara needed a father, not a ghost, who called once a month from halfway around the world. So I chose this. It's quiet. It pays the bills, and I'm here to pick her up from school every day. That's all that matters." His simple, powerful declaration of love for his daughter struck a chord deep within Olivia. Her own life was a whirlwind of board meetings, international flights, and shareholder calls. She had nannies, drivers, tutors, an entire staff to manage Harper's life because she was so rarely present herself. In that moment, she felt a pang of something that felt dangerously close to envy for this man's simple, purposeful life. It was a hard-won peace for a black man who had seen the worst of the world and chose the best for his child. She told him then about Lysander Blackwood, about his relentless pursuit, his cold ambition, and his absolute refusal to take no for an answer. She explained how his obsession had escalated from hostile business tactics to this monstrous act of violence. As she spoke, Jamal's expression remained unreadable, but his jaw was tight. So, he thinks he can break you, force you to give him what he wants. It's all he's ever known, Olivia said bitterly. Taking what he wants. After breakfast, Jamal turned on the small television to a local news channel, keeping the volume low. As the girls played, he and Olivia watched. 20 minutes into the broadcast, a news anchor gave a brief report. An incident at the Ellison Industries Tower overnight is being attributed to a major electrical fault. The building was briefly evacuated, but officials report the situation is now under control. Ellison Industries has not yet released a statement. Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. A gas leak, an electrical fault. Lysander was already rewriting history, erasing the attack, burying the truth under a mountain of lies. It was a terrifying display of his influence. He controls the narrative, she whispered. He's making it so what happened to me never even happened. As if on cue, the landline phone on the wall jangled, a harsh, intrusive sound in the quiet apartment. Jamal's body went still. He looked at the phone, then at Olivia. He hadn't used that line in months. He picked up the receiver, his eyes watchful. "Hello," he said. There was a brief pause on the other end, just long enough to be unnerving. Then a smooth, cold voice spoke. "Is a Mr. Henderson there?" "No," Jamal replied, his voice level. "You have the wrong number." "My apologies," the voice said, and the line went dead. Jamal slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. He didn't need to explain. Olivia understood. It was a probing call, a test. They had his name from the employee files. They had his address, and now they had his number. They were casting their net. Jamal walked to the window, peering cautiously through a slit in the blinds. Across the street, a black sedan was parked. It wasn't flashy, but it was out of place in his neighborhood of aging family cars and work vans. 2 men sat inside, their faces obscured, but their purpose was unmistakable. They were watching. Jamal stepped back from the window, the quiet calm in his demeanor replaced by a hardened focus. The sanctuary was breached. Their time here was over. "They found us," Olivia stated, her voice trembling slightly. "They found the janitor," Jamal corrected, his voice dangerously quiet. "They have no idea who they're dealing with. Not yet." He looked at their daughters playing peacefully on the floor, completely unaware of the wolves circling outside. "Pack a bag. We're leaving." There was no time for debate, no room for fear. Jamal moved with an urgency that was both terrifying and deeply reassuring. "Amara, pack your school bag, your favorite book, your drawing pad, and the warmest sweater you have. Nothing else," he commanded gently. He then turned to Olivia. "There's a small duffel bag in my closet. Put anything you can find for you and Harper in it. 5 minutes." While they scrambled to follow his orders, Jamal worked. He took a cheap, prepaid burner phone from a drawer, a relic of a past he never truly shed, and dialed a local pizza place. He ordered 2 large pepperoni pizzas to his address, giving his apartment number clearly and asking for the driver to call him from the lobby. A simple, classic diversion. The men in the sedan would be watching the front entrance, waiting for a delivery boy, expecting the ordinary. They would never be looking at the rusty fire escape at the back of the building. From a locked footlocker under his bed, he pulled a tightly packed canvas bag, his go bag. It was heavy with essentials he hadn't needed in 5 years, but had never discarded. Cash, a multi-tool, a high-powered flashlight, a water purification kit, and a far more comprehensive medical kit than the one he kept in the closet. The sight of it was like seeing a ghost. "Time to go," he said, his voice low. The apartment's back window led to the fire escape. It overlooked a dingy alleyway filled with overflowing dumpsters. It was a 3-story drop down a series of narrow, rickety metal stairs. Harper whimpered at the sight of it, her small hands clutching Olivia's leg. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. Olivia knelt, her own fear masked by a sudden, fierce maternal calm. "Yes, you can, sweetie. It's a game, a secret mission. We have to be spies and not let the bad guys see us." Jamal was already out on the platform, his footing sure on the groaning metal. He turned and held his arms out for Harper. "I've got you," he said, his voice a steady promise. "I will not let you fall." After a moment of hesitation, Harper let her mother guide her into Jamal's strong arms. He held her securely against his chest and started down, moving with a fluid, practiced grace. Olivia handed him the duffel bag and then helped Amara, who was trying her best to be brave, through the window. Olivia was last, her movements clumsy from her injuries, her heart pounding with a mixture of pain and adrenaline when her foot slipped on a patch of wet metal. Jamal's hand was instantly there, his grip like iron on her arm, steadying her. For a heartbeat, their eyes met in the dim light of the alley, a shared moment of fear, trust, and reliance. They reached the bottom just as they heard the pizza delivery guy buzzing the front door of the building, a perfect distraction. Jamal led them through a maze of back alleys he knew as well as the hallways of Olivia's tower. Each turn took them further from the watched street, deeper into the city's anonymous arteries. They boarded a city bus, 4 quiet shadows amidst the late-night commuters, and rode it 10 stops before getting off and melting into another neighborhood. An hour later, they stood before a locked, graffiti-covered garage. Jamal keyed in a code and the door rumbled open, revealing not a car, but a dusty, powerful-looking motorcycle with a sidecar attached. "It's not ideal," Jamal said, anticipating Olivia's question, "but it's not registered to me, and it's the last thing they'll be looking for." Amara surprisingly beamed. "Wow, Daddy." The ride was cold and loud. Jamal drove the motorcycle. Olivia sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for stability, a position of startling intimacy. The 2 girls huddled together under a thick blanket in the sidecar, their heads tucked down against the wind. They drove for 2 hours, leaving the city lights far behind, climbing into the dark pine-covered mountains that bordered the state. Finally, they turned down a long, unpaved road, the motorcycle's headlight cutting a lone path through the dense forest. They came to a stop before a small, rustic cabin barely visible in the darkness. It was utterly isolated. "My wife Layla's grandfather built this place," Jamal explained, his voice softer now. "We used to come up here to get away from everything." Inside the cabin was one large room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a sleeping loft. It was filled with the ghosts of a happy life, faded photographs on the mantelpiece, a stack of old board games, a handmade rocking chair. It was the complete opposite of Olivia's cold, minimalist penthouse. This was a home built of love, not just wood. The exhaustion of the last 24 hours hit them all at once. The girls, worn out from fear and travel, fell asleep almost instantly on the bunk beds in the loft. The adrenaline finally drained from Olivia's body, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary ache. She stood by the large picture window, looking out at the black, impenetrable wall of trees. Jamal came to stand beside her, a respectful distance between them. The only sound was the gentle crackle of the fire he had just started in the hearth. They were safe for now, a tiny island of warmth and light in an ocean of darkness. "We can't run forever, Jamal," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. She was done being a victim. "What do we do now?" Jamal's gaze followed Olivia's out the window into the vast, silent darkness of the forest. Her question, "What do we do now?" hung in the air, a challenge and a plea. For the first time since this ordeal began, he saw the CEO in her reemerge. Not in the form of demands or arrogance, but as a cool, analytical mind ready to face a problem. "First," he said, turning from the window, his voice dropping into the quiet, authoritative tone of a mission briefing, "we make sure we're secure." He spent the next hour moving through the small cabin with a methodical purpose that Olivia found both fascinating and calming. He checked the locks on the heavy wooden door in the single window, wedging a small piece of wood into the frame of the latter to prevent it from being slid open from the outside. He walked the perimeter outside, his dark form disappearing into the trees, returning minutes later with a report. "One road in, and we can see it from the loft window for half a mile. No close neighbors. The forest is too thick for an easy approach on foot. For now, This is a good position. He was no longer a janitor, nor just a father. He was a protector, surveying his territory. He returned to the fireplace where she stood, the warmth of the flames doing little to chase away her internal chill. "Now your turn," he said. "Tell me about this man, Lysander Blackwood. Not the businessman, the man. What are his weaknesses?" The question shifted the dynamic between them. He was deferring to her expertise, to her battlefield. Jamal, the former ranger, knew the value of knowing your enemy in any war, corporate or otherwise. For the next hour, she laid out the architecture of her enemy. Lysander was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly amoral, but his greatest strength was also his greatest weakness, his ego. "He's a narcissist," Olivia explained, pacing in front of the fire. "He needs to be seen as a titan, a visionary. His public image is everything to him. He spent a fortune cultivating it. He buys respectability, sits on charity boards, endows university wings. It's all a performance." "So, the one thing he can't afford is a public scandal," Jamal concluded. "Especially not one involving a violent assault and an attempted forced marriage," she agreed, a hard edge to her voice. "If I could prove what he did, I could ruin him. But it's my word against his, and my word is currently coming from a ghost he's already erased." They needed an ally, someone on the outside, someone utterly incorruptible and completely loyal. Not her corporate lawyer, who was brilliant, but part of the system Lysander could manipulate. Not her head of security, who was good, but whose team could have a weak link. "Anselm Crow," Olivia said suddenly. "He was my father's lawyer, my mentor. He's retired now, lives up in the mountains himself. He's 75, sharp as a razor, and he despises men like Lysander. If there's one person I can trust with my life, it's him." The problem was contacting him. Jamal retrieved the go bag and produced one of the burner phones. "This is our one shot. We make the call, we keep it under 30 seconds, and then this phone becomes a paperweight. Anyone trying to trace it will only get a ping off a cell tower 10 miles from here. And by the time they get a team there, the trail will be ice cold." As he prepared the phone, Olivia's gaze fell on the mantelpiece. She picked up the framed photo she had noticed earlier. It was of a younger Jamal, not in uniform, but in a simple t-shirt, his arm around a woman with a warm, infectious smile. Amara, a toddler at the time, sat on his shoulders. They were all laughing. The picture radiated a pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Your wife?" Olivia asked softly. Jamal glanced at the photo and the hard lines on his face softened. "That's Layla. We were hiking near here. She's beautiful," Olivia said, her voice catching slightly. She was trespassing on sacred ground. This cabin was their sanctuary, filled with a love she had only read about. The contrast with her own life, a calculated marriage that had ended in a sterile divorce, and now a monstrous courtship from Lysander, was a physical ache in her chest. "She was," he said simply. The finality of that one word held a universe of pain. She must have swayed, a wave of dizziness from her concussion, choosing that moment to hit. Jamal was instantly at her side, his hand securely on her arm, guiding her to the rocking chair by the fire. "You need to rest, Olivia. You're pushing yourself too hard." "I don't have time to rest," she argued, though her body betrayed her. He knelt in front of her, his expression serious. "You're no good to Harper if you collapse." His gaze was intense, and for the first time she saw something beyond the soldier and the father. She saw the man, a man who understood loss, and was fighting fiercely to prevent another one. His hand was still on her arm, a point of solid grounding warmth. The intimacy of the gesture of his concern was more potent than any flattery she had ever received. She pulled back slightly, flustered by her own reaction, and nodded. "You're right." They made the call. Jamal dialed the number Olivia gave him from memory. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Crow, Anselm, it's Olivia." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Olivia!" "Good God," the voice said. "They're saying you've taken a leave of absence, that you're unreachable." I knew it was a lie. "Are you all right?" "I'm safe for now," she said, speaking quickly, aware of Jamal's hand signal to keep it short. "Listen to me. It was Lysander Blackwood. He sent men. I have my daughter with me, and we are in hiding. I need your help. I need you to start digging. Quietly. Look into his import records, his holding companies, anything that doesn't look right. He's hiding something. Anselm, find it. Consider it done. Where are you? How can I help? You can't. Not yet. Don't try to find me. It's not safe. I'll contact you again in 2 days. Same time. Be careful, Olivia. Anselm's voice was grave. I will, she said, and gave Jamal the nod. He ended the call immediately, popped the back off the phone, and snapped the SIM card in half. He then broke the phone itself over his knee and tossed the pieces into the fire. The plastic sizzled and melted, their only link to the outside world gone. A fragile sense of victory settled in the room. They had taken their first step. They had started to fight back. Olivia looked at Jamal, the firelight flickering across his resolute face. Thank you, she said, the words carrying a weight far beyond simple gratitude. He simply nodded, his eyes on the fire. But as the last of the phone disappeared into the flames, a low, rhythmic sound began to break the silence of the forest. Faint at first, then growing steadily louder. Thump, 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 thump. Jamal was on his feet in an instant, his body tense, his gaze snapping toward the window. The sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of a helicopter flying low and fast, sweeping through the mountains, and it was heading their way. The low, rhythmic thumping of the helicopter blades grew from a distant pulse to a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very logs of the cabin. Hope died in an instant, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of fear. Kill the fire, Jamal snapped, his voice a blade cutting through the noise. He grabbed a bucket of water from the hearth meant for stray embers and upended it over the cheerful flames. The fire hissed violently, plunging the room into a thick, acrid smoke and near total darkness, the only light now coming from the dying red embers. Olivia, get the girls. Keep them in the center of the room, away from the windows. Olivia didn't question him. She flew up the ladder to the loft where the terrifying noise had already woken the children. Amara was sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide, while Harper was curled into a ball, whimpering. Olivia gathered them both, her arms a protective shield, and guided them down into the main room, her heart hammering against her ribs. What's happening? Amara whispered, her voice trembling. It's a loud airplane, sweetie. It will be gone in a minute, Olivia lied, her voice miraculously steady. Jamal was a shadow moving against the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. He pulled the heavy curtains shut, sealing them in an almost complete blackness. The helicopter was nearly on top of them now, the thumping so loud it felt like a giant fist pounding on the roof. Then a brilliant white light cut through the night, a searchlight. It sliced through the treetops, turning the familiar forest into a stark alien landscape of black and white. Jamal pulled them all down to the floor, covering the girls' heads with his own body. Olivia huddled beside them, her arm thrown over her daughter, her breath held tight in her chest. The beam swept past the cabin, momentarily illuminating a gap in the curtains and painting a blinding stripe of white across the floor before moving on. The sound was deafening, the vibrations rattling the dishes in the kitchen cabinets. They were being hunted from the sky. The power, the sheer audacity of it was terrifying. This was what Lysander's wealth could buy. A private army, a helicopter, the ability to scour a mountain range in the dead of night as if looking for a lost pet. For what felt like an eternity, the helicopter circled, its light methodically sweeping the area. Olivia could feel Harper trembling uncontrollably beneath her. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. She prayed for the light to stay away, for the sound to stop. She prayed for the quiet janitor who had become their only hope. Then, as slowly as it arrived, the sound began to recede. The thumping grew fainter, the light disappearing over the next ridge. They stayed on the floor, unmoving, until the helicopter was nothing more than a distant, fading pulse, finally swallowed by the silence of the forest. The quiet that returned was heavier, more menacing than before. "Are they gone?" Amara whispered from under her father's arm. Jamal didn't move for a full minute, listening. Finally, he relaxed his body, though the tension never left his shoulders. "For now," he said. He rose and went to the window, peering through the smallest of gaps. The forest was dark and still once more. The phone call, Olivia breathed, the guilt a physical weight. He traced the call. Oh, God, Jamal, I'm so sorry. I let him find us. Stop, he said, his voice firm but not unkind as he turned from the window. We both knew it was a risk. It was a move we had to make. We just underestimated his resources. His tech team is better than I thought. He came and knelt before the girls, who were now clinging to Olivia. That was the end of the game, he said softly. You both did great. You were very brave spies. His praise seemed to calm them, their trembling subsiding slightly. He looked at Olivia over their heads, his eyes communicating a clear message. The kids first, we panic later. Together they got the girls settled back in the loft, tucked under a pile of heavy quilts. Jamal sat with them for a few minutes, his deep, calm voice telling them a quiet story about a clever fox who outsmarted a pack of wolves. Olivia watched him from the foot of the ladder, her heart aching with a complex mix of gratitude, fear, and a burgeoning admiration that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. He wasn't just their protector, he was their anchor. When he was sure they were asleep, he came back down. The dying embers of the fire cast long, dancing shadows around the room. I was so scared, Olivia admitted, her voice barely audible. Not for me. When that light came through the window, all I could think about was Harper. I know, he said, his voice laced with a deep, weary understanding. It's the only thing that matters. He looked toward the loft where his own daughter slept. It's the only thing that's ever mattered. In the shared, vulnerable silence, the space between them seemed to shrink. They were no longer a CEO and a janitor. They were two parents trapped in the same nightmare, bound by the same fierce primal need to protect their children. We have to move, she said, stating the obvious. We can't stay here. No, he agreed. That helicopter was a scout, a hunter, flushing out its prey. The ground team will be next. They'll wait until dawn maybe to make their approach. A fragile temporary relief washed over her. They had a few hours. So, we leave now? In the dark? Jamal was about to answer when his head snapped toward the window again. His body went rigid. He held up a hand, silencing her. He had heard something. She strained her ears, hearing nothing but the wind in the pines, and then she heard it too. It wasn't the sound of a helicopter. It was the crunch of tires on the gravel of the long, unpaved road. A low, rumbling engine growing steadily closer. He moved to the window, his form melting into the shadows. He peered through the curtain for a long, tense moment before stepping back, his face grim, carved from stone in the faint moonlight. It's too late, he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. They're not waiting for dawn. He looked at her, and his eyes were the eyes of the ranger she'd seen in her office, a man preparing for a fight he had never wanted but would not run from. They're here. The finality in Jamal's voice was absolute. There was no escape. The fight had come to them. Olivia, the loft now, he commanded, his voice a low whisper that somehow cut through the rising panic in the room. Take the girls. Get in the far corner and stay down. Do not make a sound. As Olivia scrambled to obey, herding the two terrified children up the ladder, Jamal moved with a chilling efficiency. He slid the heaviest piece of furniture in the cabin, a solid oak chest in front of the door, barricading it. He wasn't just blocking the entrance, he was creating a choke point. He moved to the stone fireplace, reaching deep into the chimney flue. His fingers found a loose stone and he pulled it free. From the dark cavity behind it, he withdrew a long, canvas-wrapped object. He laid it on the floor and unrolled the canvas to reveal a vintage bolt-action hunting rifle and a small box of cartridges. It was his father-in-law's, oiled and maintained with a muscle memory that had never left him. It wasn't the M4 he was trained on, but it was a weapon. It was an answer. He chambered around, the click-clack of the bolt echoing with terrifying loudness in the silent cabin. Outside, two vehicles crunched to a stop. Headlights sliced through the window curtains, sweeping across the room before the engines and lights were cut, plunging them back into darkness. Doors opened and closed. Muted voices carried on the night air. They were surrounding the house. Jamal took up a position near the main window, using the small gap in the curtains as a peephole. He counted 4 men moving with professional ease, fanning out to cover the front and sides of the cabin. They were not the same thugs from the office. These men were better trained, their movements economical and sure. Lysander had sent his A-team. From the loft, Olivia watched, her arms wrapped around the 2 girls who were huddled between her and the wall. She could see the top of Jamal's head, the way he held the rifle with a practiced stillness that was both terrifying and the only source of hope she had. He wasn't a janitor playing hero. He was a soldier on his own territory. Then a voice cut through the night, amplified by a megaphone. It was calm, reasonable, and utterly reptilian. Olivia Ellison, my name is Slate. We know you're in there. We know you have the janitor and the 2 children with you. Mr. Blackwood is a reasonable man. He wants you back unharmed. This doesn't need to get ugly. Send out the janitor and we can discuss the terms of your return. The voice was a lie wrapped in civility. It was designed to sow dissent, to turn her against Jamal, to make him the obstacle to a peaceful resolution. Don't listen, she whispered, though he couldn't possibly hear her. He's lying. Jamal didn't move a muscle. He simply watched, breathing slowly, his cheek resting against the smooth wood of the rifle stock. He was counting, assessing, waiting. The voice came again. Mitchell, we know your name. We know about your daughter, Amara. Don't be a fool. You're a janitor who got in over his head. This isn't your fight. You have 10 seconds to come out with your hands up before she gets hurt because of you. The threat against his daughter was a mistake. It stripped away the last vestiges of the quiet man Jamal had tried to become and left only the cold, hard core of the Ranger. He had built his entire life around protecting that little girl, and these men had just threatened to burn it all down. He saw one of the men break from cover, moving toward the side of the cabin, toward the propane tank that fed the stove. It was the move he was waiting for. He adjusted his aim slightly, his breath held steady. He wasn't aiming for the man. He was aiming for the vehicle behind him. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was a deafening cannon blast inside the cabin. Outside there was a sharp ping of metal on metal, followed by the sound of shattering glass and the hiss of air escaping a tire. The man who had been moving dove for cover, cursing. The message was delivered. There would be no negotiation. This was not a rescue. It was a siege, and the man inside was not a janitor. A tense, ringing silence followed the gunshot. From the loft, Olivia peered down. Jamal hadn't moved. He was reloading the rifle, his movements fluid and economical. He ejected the spent cartridge and slid a new one home. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. In that shared glance, an entire conversation passed. I'm here. I'm not running. Protect the children. She gave him a single firm nod. We're ready. They were a unit, bound by the desperate fight for their family. The men outside were silent for a long time. They knew they were facing someone with skills, someone who wouldn't be intimidated. Their approach would have to change. Jamal's gaze swept the room, his eyes adjusting to the dark. He was thinking, planning his next move, when a new smell, faint at first, reached him. It was a sharp chemical odor cutting through the scent of pine and wood smoke. He moved to the front door, sniffing at the crack at the bottom. The smell was stronger there, acrid and unmistakable. Gasoline. He looked back up at Olivia, the grim realization dawning on both of them at the same time. They weren't being offered a deal. They were being given a death sentence. A new voice, the same cold one from the phone, drifted through the night. No megaphone this time, just a conversational yell. Last chance, Mitchell. Come out or we burn you out. The acrid smell of gasoline was the smell of a closing trap. There was no way out, not through the door, not through the window. For a split second, Olivia felt a paralyzing despair. They were going to die here in this beautiful haunted cabin because of her. But Jamal didn't deal in despair. He dealt in solutions. His eyes darted around the room, not looking for an escape, but for an opening the enemy hadn't considered. His gaze landed on the large circular bearskin rug in the center of the room. The cellar, he hissed, his voice tight with urgency. He kicked the rug aside, revealing a thick, recessed iron ring set into the floorboards. He hooked his fingers through it and heaved. A square section of the floor lifted up with a groan of old wood, revealing a black gaping hole and a steep wooden ladder descending into darkness. It smelled of damp earth and cold stone. "Go," he ordered, pointing at Olivia. "Take the girls. There's an old storm hatch at the far end. It comes up behind the woodpile. Go now." Just as he spoke, a shattering crash came from the main window. A glass bottle filled with flaming liquid, a Molotov cocktail, flew through the air and smashed against the stone fireplace. Flames erupted, licking instantly up the dry wooden walls. The heat was immediate, intense. Smoke began to billow through the room. The children were screaming now, their terror raw and unrestrained. Olivia, acting on pure maternal instinct, grabbed them both. "It's okay, babies. We're going down the secret slide," she yelled over the roar of the fire, pulling them towards the gaping hole. Amara, trusting her father implicitly, went first, scrambling down the ladder without hesitation. But Harper was frozen, her eyes fixed on the growing inferno. "Harper, now!" Olivia screamed. Jamal scooped the little girl up and practically dropped her into Olivia's waiting arms in the cellar opening. "Get her out of here," he roared. He grabbed the heavy oak chest he'd used as a barricade, and with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, dragged it over the open trap door just as the entire front of the cabin became engulfed in flames. For a few precious seconds, the heavy wood would shield them from the fire raining down. The cellar was pitch black. Olivia, holding a hysterical Harper, felt her way down the rickety ladder, her bare feet touching the cold, damp earth of the floor. Amara was already there, a small, brave shadow in the dark. "Daddy," Amara cried out, her voice tight with fear. "I'm right behind you," Jamal's voice called from above, followed by the sound of him pulling the heavy trapdoor shut from below. They were plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. The roar of the fire above them was a monstrous, living thing, and the heat was already seeping through the floorboards. Jamal's flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "This way, stay close." He led them through the narrow, musty-smelling root cellar. They could hear the shouts of the men outside, the crackle and groan of the cabin as the fire consumed it. It was a terrifying, hellish sound. At the far end of the cellar was a heavy, slanted wooden door. Jamal put his shoulder to it and shoved. It gave way with a spray of dirt and dead leaves, opening up to the cold night air behind a large, neatly stacked wood pile. They were out. The night sky was aglow with the light of the burning cabin. It was a funeral pyre, a massive, roaring diversion. The men, silhouetted against the flames, were all focused on the front of the structure, waiting for their trapped prey to emerge. They had no idea their targets were already gone, melting into the darkness of the forest behind them. Jamal didn't pause. "We move now," he whispered, pulling Olivia to her feet. "Don't look back. Just follow me." And so began their desperate trek through the wilderness. Jamal took the lead, carrying the exhausted Harper, who had cried herself into a fitful sleep. Olivia held tight to Amara's hand, her bruised ribs screaming with every step, her lungs burning from the smoke. They moved in silence, Jamal navigating the treacherous terrain with an instinct that seemed almost supernatural in the darkness. He was part of this wilderness, a shadow moving through shadows. An hour later, they collapsed in a deep, moss-lined ravine, shielded from sight. The glow from the fire was a distant, dying ember in the sky. They were alone, surrounded by the immense, indifferent silence of the mountains. Olivia's body gave out. The strength that had carried her this far evaporated, and she began to shake, deep, uncontrollable tremors of shock and exhaustion. "We're not going to make it," she sobbed, the words torn from her. "They'll find us. We're out here with nothing." Jamal slid down the ravine wall beside her. He took off his thick canvas jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false hope. "Yes, we are," he said, his voice raw but unwavering. He gently took her hand, his calloused, dark fingers lacing through hers. "I've been in worse places than this, Olivia. I've been colder, more tired, and had people actively shooting at me. We are going to make it. I've got you. I've got all of you. She looked at him, at his exhausted but resolute face, illuminated by the faint moonlight. The lines of class and circumstance that had separated them had been burned away in the fire, leaving only this. Two people, two families, bound together. In his eyes, she saw not just a soldier's promise, but a man's vow. Her shaking began to subside, replaced by a fragile, budding warmth that had nothing to do with his jacket. She squeezed his hand, a silent answer. I trust you. They rested for only a few more minutes. The mountain air was growing colder, a damp chill that promised rain. As Jamal gently roused Harper to continue their journey, the little girl let out a small, dry cough, then another. Olivia's heart froze. She pressed her hand to Harper's forehead. It was warm, too warm. The smoke, the cold, the terror. It had all been too much for her small body. They had escaped the fire and the gunmen, but now, alone in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, they faced a new and even more relentless enemy. Harper was getting sick, and their desperate race for survival had just become a race against time. The race against the mountain was a brutal, desperate marathon. Every step was a battle. Harper's coughing grew worse, a wet, ragged sound that tore at Olivia's soul. Jamal, carrying the child, moved with a relentless, forward-plunging momentum. His years of ranger training the only thing keeping them going. He navigated by the stars and the feel of the terrain under his feet, a human compass pointing towards their last desperate hope. Olivia followed, her own pain a distant roar in her ears. She held Amara's hand, her grip a lifeline. In the dark she saw not a child, but a mirror of her father's resilience. The girl never complained, her small legs pumping to keep up, her trust in her father absolute. Just when Olivia thought she couldn't take another step, that her lungs would burst from the cold, thin air, Jamal stopped. Through the trees, a dark, angular shape stood against the slightly less dark sky. A small one-room structure with a crooked radio antenna reaching up like a skeletal finger, the old ranger outpost. The door was swollen shut, but Jamal's shoulder, thrown against it with the last of his strength, forced it open with a crack of splintering wood. The air inside was stale and freezing, the smell of dust and disuse, but it was shelter. Fire, Jamal gasped, his first priority. While Olivia settled the girls on a dusty cot, bundling them in the last of their dry clothes, he worked on the old wood stove. Using his knife, he shaved tinder from a dry log left inside, and with a spark from his multi-tool, he coaxed a tiny flame to life. As the fragile warmth began to push back the oppressive cold, he turned his attention to Harper. He used the last of the supplies from his go-bag, a small medical kit that was a miniature marvel of efficiency. He administered a child's dose of aspirin to fight the fever and used an inhaler to help open her airways, a piece of equipment he always carried for Amara's seasonal allergies. It's smoke inhalation and the onset of pneumonia, he said grimly, his voice low. I can keep her stable for a few hours, but she needs a real doctor. She needs a hospital. Their only hope was the radio. It was an ancient military surplus machine powered by a hand-cranked generator. While Olivia held the flashlight, Jamal worked on the corroded terminals, his fingers surprisingly nimble. For 20 agonizing minutes, the only sound was his quiet cursing and the scratch of metal on metal. Then a crackle of static broke the silence. He had done it. He handed the microphone to Olivia. Anselm Crow, no one else. Her voice, trembling but clear, cut through the static. She poured out the entire story. Her words a torrent of information. The attack, the cabin, the fire, their location at the abandoned outpost. She gave Anselm the authority to act, to unleash the legal and media storm she knew he was capable of. He tried to kill me, Anselm, she finished, her voice breaking with fury and exhaustion. He tried to kill my daughter. Burn it all down. Everything he has, burn it to the ground. The line was silent for a long moment, and then her mentor's voice came back, no longer gravelly, but cold as steel. With pleasure. After the call, there was nothing left to do but wait. Exhausted beyond measure, they huddled together by the growing warmth of the stove. Jamal wrapped his arm around Olivia, pulling her and the two sleeping girls closer. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the hard muscle a comfort, a reality in a world gone mad. The soldier, the CEO, the janitor, all of it fell away. They were just two people keeping their family warm in the dark. Help arrived with the first gray light of dawn. Not Lysander's men, but the flashing red and blue lights of the state police, led by a determined-looking Anselm Crow himself. A medical team airlifted a stable but weak Harper to the nearest hospital with Olivia right beside her. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospitals, legal statements, and news reports. Anselm's attack was surgical. Armed with Olivia's testimony and the evidence Jamal's actions had preserved, he exposed Lysander Blackwood to the world. The story of the billionaire's monstrous obsession was a media firestorm. Faced with federal charges for attempted murder, kidnapping, and a dozen other crimes, Lysander's empire, built on a lie, collapsed under the weight of his own evil. 1 month later, on a bright, crisp autumn afternoon, Olivia sat on a park bench, watching Harper and Amara chase each other through a pile of fallen leaves, their laughter echoing in the clear air. Harper had made a full recovery, and the two girls were now inseparable. Jamal sat down beside her, handing her a warm cup of coffee. He looked different without the weight of the world on him. The hard lines around his eyes had softened. He just looked like a father watching his daughter play. "I was cleared to go back to work at the tower," he said with a wry smile. "I think I'll pass." Olivia laughed, a real, genuine sound. She had her life back, her company, her power. But the fire had burned something away in her too, a cold ambition, a need for control. It had been replaced by something warmer, something real. "I'm glad," she said, "because I have a proposition for you." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "I already told you, Olivia, I don't want your money or a job." "I know," she said, her smile soft. She turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable. "That's not the kind of proposition I had in mind. For years, I've built an empire. I've merged companies, acquired assets. It's what I do, but I've been doing it all wrong." She took his hand, the same calloused hand that had pulled her from the fire, that had held her steady in the dark. "This isn't a business deal, Jamal. It's a merger, a full partnership. 2 single-parent households, a combined total of 2 very awesome little girls, and 2 people who found each other in the middle of a nightmare." She took a breath, her heart in her throat. "Marry me." Jamal stared at her, truly shocked for the first time since she'd met him. He looked at her earnest, hopeful face, then over at their 2 daughters, who were now holding hands, a perfect, tiny picture of their new, blended family. A slow smile spread across his warm brown face, reaching his eyes. "Olivia Ellison," he said, his voice full of a warmth she had only dreamed of. "A full partnership is the only deal I'd ever be willing to accept." He squeezed her hand, and together they watched their children play. The sounds of their laughter, the only thing that mattered. They had walked through fire. But on the other side, in the most unexpected way, they had finally found their way home.